Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're cutting straight through the pop culture rumors to uncover the electrifying truth behind one of history's most fascinating minds, Nikola Tesla. We're going to move past all the myths and look at the real history and the real physics. We'll start with that legendary rivalry that literally shaped the modern world, and then dive right into the hard, undeniable science of his absolute most famous invention.
Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the War of the Currents, the making of a genius, AC versus DC power, the anatomy of the Tesla coil, sparks, myths, and danger, and finally, the Tesla legacy. Let's get right into it.
Kicking things off with the War of the Currents.
So picture the late 19th century. We've got this massive contrast envisioned between two absolute titans of industry. Thomas Edison had already built the first power station in New York City, right? And his system used direct current, or DC. Now, DC was great for what he was doing, but it had a massive, crippling limitation. It was low voltage and strictly localized. To power a whole city, you'd basically need a bulky power plant on almost every single square mile. It was just super inefficient for mass expansion. But then, enter Nikola Tesla. Tesla championed a totally different approach, alternating current, or AC. This was a high-voltage system genuinely capable of long-distance transmission without losing tons of power along the way. Now, you have to understand this wasn't just some polite scientific disagreement. It sparked a bitter, high-stakes corporate rivalry, the War of the Currents, a literal battle to decide exactly how the entire globe would be powered.
Moving right along to the making of a genius. Who exactly was the man who dared to challenge Edison?
Well, Tesla was a guy with intense, almost unimaginable focus. He had this extraordinary, unique edge, an eidetic memory, basically a photographic memory that let him visualize entire, incredibly complex 3D machines right in his head before he ever even put a pen to paper. And what's really cool, Tesla actually credited this profound spatial and mechanical genius entirely to his mother's genetics and influence. Even though she never had a formal education, she was a highly talented inventor of mechanical appliances and complex homecraft tools herself. She passed that incredible aptitude straight down to her son, laying the groundwork for a mind that would literally modernize electricity.
But look, his path to greatness was anything but smooth. In 1873, a young Tesla contracted cholera. It was absolutely devastating. He was bedridden for 9 excruciating months and nearly died several times. But surviving that illness seemed to forge this unstoppable, almost obsessive drive to succeed. Fast forward a bit to 1882, and his undeniable brilliance took him from a grueling recovery in Europe to working at Continental Edison in Paris, installing indoor lighting. He proved himself so incredibly fast that just 2 years later, in 1884, he crossed the Atlantic to the US. And this brought him right into the belly of the beast. He was hired to work directly at the Edison Machine Works in New York City. The stage was officially set.
Which brings us to the actual science of AC versus DC power.
See, the tipping point in this rivalry wasn't about who had better PR. It was about undeniable physics and practical economics. Direct current, like the name suggests, flows in exactly one direction. And while DC was fantastic for early light bulbs and small systems, it just couldn't be transmitted over long distances without massive energy loss. The cost to wire a whole country with DC? Absolutely astronomical. Alternating current, on the other hand, periodically reverses its direction. And why does that matter? Because AC can easily be stepped up to incredibly high voltages to travel hundreds of miles across a wire and then seamlessly stepped back down at a local transformer so it's safe to use in your house. AC prevailed because it was economical for vast distances. Plus, it could be continuously generated by massive turbines drawing from powerful natural sources, like water rushing through a dam. Simply put, it was really the only scientifically viable way to wire a sprawling nation.
Now let's step out of the power grid and into the laboratory, specifically looking at the anatomy of his most iconic invention.
To truly wrap our heads around the Tesla coil, which by the way was invented in 1891, we first need to define what it actually is. It's completely different from those bulky transformers on the power poles outside your house. It's what's called a resonant transformer. An ordinary iron core transformer is just designed to transfer energy from one circuit to another. But a resonant transformer? It's an air-cored device specifically tuned to temporarily store and rapidly exchange high-frequency alternating currents. Think of it like two tuning forks that are tuned to the exact same pitch. If you strike one, the other immediately begins to hum, passing that energy flawlessly back and forth through resonance. That is the absolute genius at the heart of the Tesla coil.
So let's walk through exactly how this happens step by step. Think of it like pushing a kid on a playground swing. To get them going really high, you push them right at the peak of their backwards swing, right? You add a little more energy each time. Here's how it works in the coil.
First, a high-voltage supply charges up the capacitor, kind of like a bucket filling with water. Second, once that voltage hits a critical breaking point, the spark gap violently fires, acting as an ultra-fast switch dumping all that energy. Third, this sudden release causes the primary coil to violently oscillate, and finally, that energy transfers seamlessly over to the secondary coil. This energy rapidly shifts back and forth between the circuits, ringing up the voltage to massive, unbelievable levels. We're talking millions of volts in mere fractions of a millisecond. It's wild.
But all of that incredible high-voltage energy brings us to sparks, myths, and danger. Now, you might have seen videos of daring performers or amateur hobbyists letting these massive electrical streamers literally hit their bare hands. Naturally, that brings up a huge question. Are Tesla coils actually harmless to touch? The tricky part here, and what's honestly so utterly fascinating, is human biology. See, the human nervous system simply doesn't register pain at these extremely high radio frequencies, typically anything over 10 to 20 kilohertz. It completely bypasses that classic muscle-contracting shock you'd get from a wall outlet. Because of this eerie lack of pain, a lot of people, dangerously and falsely, assume these spectacular electric arcs are perfectly safe to interact with.
We need to completely bust the skin effect myth right here, right now. There's this pervasive rumor floating around the internet that these high-frequency currents just safely glide over the surface of your skin, protecting your insides. No way. That is totally false. In reality, these radio frequency currents penetrate human tissue roughly 24 to 72 centimeters deep. They don't just travel on the surface. Electricity always takes the path of least resistance, and in this case, that path goes directly through the highly conductive, wet core of your own body.
So even though someone touching a coil might just feel a slight painless tingling, or maybe a gentle warmth on their skin, the biological reality happening underneath is terrifying. Because that current passes right through your core, it causes deep-seated RF burns. It literally acts like a microwave, heating your internal tissues and organs from the inside out, causing massive cellular damage you won't even feel until it's way too late. Plus, if a lower frequency from the primary coil accidentally makes its way into the strike, it can instantly trigger ventricular fibrillation in the human heart. The risk of lethal electrocution is very, very real. The big takeaway for us here, never let a lack of pain trick you into ignoring the uncompromising laws of physics.
And that brings us to our final section, the Tesla legacy.
The reality of Tesla's later life is honestly a bit tragic. He spent most of his money on these grandiose experiments, faced constant financial hurdles, and ultimately died in relative obscurity, living his final days in a series of New York hotels with a pile of unpaid bills. But his intellectual legacy? Absolutely monumental. Just look around you. We live in a modern world entirely empowered by alternating current. Tesla's polyphase system and his brilliant AC induction motor became the absolute bedrock cornerstone of the modern electrical grid. Every single second of the day, when you flip a light switch, turn on a computer, or even charge the very device you're watching this explainer on, you are directly relying on the system Nikola Tesla fought so hard to implement.
Thank you for exploring the brilliant, complicated science of Nikola Tesla with us today. Before we wrap up, consider this. Tesla didn't just want to wire the world, he ultimately wanted to cut the cords entirely. Look at his Wardenclyffe Tower project, this astonishingly ambitious plan to transmit wireless communication and electricity across the entire globe through the Earth's atmosphere. He ran out of funding before he could ever complete it, and the tower was torn down. But I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder. If Tesla had never run out of money and his ultimate dream of intercontinental wireless power had actually succeeded, how completely different would our world look today?